My name is Trinity Yang, I'm 19 years old, and I'm currently living in Seattle, Washington. This is my story. So I've kind of just grown up in Seattle my whole life. I was born here, my parents moved here somewhere in the 1990s, and they kind of just settled down and made a life for themselves in Seattle, and then they brought me into the world. I would say my childhood was a little bit lonely because they were always working. My parents, they had like multiple jobs. A lot of my childhood was just spent either accompanying them at the restaurant, like where they worked. I would kind of just like sit in a corner at a table doing my own thing, or I would just stay at home, read a lot of books, listen to a lot of music. Back when CDs were still a thing, and I listened to the same CD like maybe 1,000 times. I wouldn't say that my parents like know a lot about me. They've definitely tried to be there, but there's still like that feeling of absentness. That's just how things were, and I think they did the best they could. Part of it, I would say, is this whole culture in Asian families in general, just not really speaking your emotions and not really being very transparent with how you're feeling, because I think there's a lot of stigma against that. It's kind of just like a thing where you like don't talk about it. You don't really talk about like if you're lonely or if you're sad or anything. But it has changed now in quarantine. Like since we're all home, like there's nothing we can do except see each other. I am more like them than I thought before. I see myself as both Taiwanese, Chinese, and American. I think being this like second generation immigrant, it's being a mix of cultures. I feel such strong ties to both sides. It's a little bit hard though, honestly, too, because I feel like I want to be really in touch with my Taiwanese and Chinese cultural roots, but there's always like so much that I won't ever know because that just wasn't my life. What I know of that culture is just what's been passed down to me from the Taiwanese community and also from my parents, but there's so many like unspoken things that I just won't ever experience, and I don't think I will get to experience even if I lived there, even if I like suddenly became like super involved in the Taiwanese community. Also just having the mix of like the American identity, it puts me at a distance from my parents because I have perspectives that they will never know, and it's also like distancing me from like American because like I have experiences of like these like Asian cultures and Asian values that they will never know. I think it's really being stuck in both worlds and wanting to be in both but never being able to. There's always like part of me that wishes that I was more in touch with my cultural values. I feel like just being Americanized, there's so much that I've already lost. I'm definitely not like perfect in language or in cooking. I'm definitely not perfect in like knowing every like Taiwanese, Chinese recipe, whatever. Those are things that even if I decide to learn, it'll be through some sort of medium that isn't exactly authentic because it isn't what I grew up with. I am proud of being that sort of mix. I do know that I'm perceived as Americanized and as like, as they say, like ABC, American born Chinese. I've tried to really be as in touch with my cultural roots as I possibly could, by learning as much as I could and engaging with the language and the food and the traditions and the values. But there is still like that Americanness that is kind of looked down upon by like the immigrants because they're like, oh, you're not as traditional as we would have hoped. You're not as like as authentic to our experience and our values. But there's also, they understand that it's because like I was raised here. In terms of kind of the perception from my more American peers, a lot of my community I would say is Asian American, so they understand like the sentiment, and that's definitely what they go through too. So it's not like anything where I feel alienated or ostracized. School has always been such a hugely emphasized thing in my life. I feel like I never knew anything besides school. That was kind of how I defined success. I think still a huge part of how I define productivity and identity today, because my parents worked so hard to really give me the opportunities to pursue school and to really make an American education available to me. They've always made it like such a big deal that I have to do really well in school, and I have to like get to good college. So since they were always like really big on education, and since like in my childhood I had a lot of free time to just like do whatever by myself, my parents told me, they were like, you need to learn how to read. And I was like, okay. So I learned how to read when I was kind of young, and then I spent a lot of time reading books in kindergarten and in first grade. And then one time when my teacher noticed in first grade that I was reading this like small little book that's like the literacy level of Magic Tree House or something, she was like, wow, you should totally like take this test to go to like this other school. So then I took it, and then I got moved to this like other program that was supposedly for like advanced kids. But I mean, in comparison to those advanced kids, I was kind of stupid. For some reason, I told myself that if I didn't work super hard in middle school, I wasn't going to get into a good college, which doesn't make sense now that I think about it. So in middle school, I tried really hard, and that was kind of like the start of like my really dedicated academic career. I started juggling a bunch of things because first I was like, I always had this idea that I was like, oh, I really need to go to a good college. I need to like make my parents proud, and I need to make all their effort worth it. So I would join like everything possible, which was such a poor idea because I was doing all these things that weren't making me happy. I was doing like a bunch of clubs, and I was like, I need to be like leadership in these clubs. I guess I did well, like on paper, I looked good, but it really wasn't anything that I would say was super meaningful, especially in like the first couple of years in high school. Then I kind of, as I got more interested in more specific things like Asian culture, I found my niche in kind of doing like the Asian Cultural Club in high school. Like I was still like continuing the whole like good grades thing. Like I need to take all these like advanced classes to look good on paper. And also like I need to start working. So then I did like 2 jobs, and then I was working, I think almost full time for maybe the second half of high school. Since I've kind of matured and looked back on that kind of life, which was really unsustainable, I see now like how my life is different, and on paper it doesn't look like I'm doing as much as I did before. Like I'm not doing like a billion clubs, and I'm not like running so many organizations, and I'm not committing so and so hours to work and to volunteering and etc. But I do think that the things that I'm doing now are more meaningful to my growth, and I think it's a better definition of the word education than I really knew before. So it's been a really interesting journey for me. But looking back, I don't think I would do anything different. I think still doing those things did make me the person that I am today in terms of like how I view hard work and how I view the effort that I do put into the things that I do. One setback that I would say is is making the mistake of building this one relationship in high school, and that person was just a really like toxic presence in life. And I think kind of associating with them had a lot of like negative effect on like my self-worth and how I viewed relationships and how I thought they were supposed to exist. I have learned from the experience, and I now know that like this is not the kind of person that I want in my life ever. I want like friends who empower me, and people who look out for my success, and people who will support me in my failures. I'm currently studying global health as my major, and with minors in nonprofits, philanthropy and volunteerism, and natural studies. And I'm thinking about jazz studies. Not sure about that one. We'll see if I have time in my schedule. Outside of studying, I've been doing a lot more focus on community work and kind of championing other people's success. So for me, that means like doing a lot more volunteering in the community, especially like educating the youth and becoming a mentor for low-income first-generation high school students who don't have as much access to resources to really get them into colleges and prepare them for post-secondary studies. Working on myself, kind of working on like social anxiety and working on making myself like confident. I am working on like researching like human trafficking and how medical professionals like should identify and really face human trafficking as an ethical issue. Working on just being like somebody who is more okay with changing the ideals of what is important to me, and being able to say no, being able to have a focus on what is really meaningful, and being able to be okay with failure. I always had this idea since I was pretty young, like middle school or high school. I was like, oh, I really, really, really want to leave Seattle. Like I didn't want to be stuck. I knew I wanted to explore and I wanted to see the world, and I didn't want to be one of those people who just graduated and stayed here forever. I went to USC in LA. It wasn't as great as I expected, but I am so thankful for how much I was put out of my comfort zone. I I think my biggest passion is empowering the community, and what I really enjoy is seeing other people grow to their potential and seeing other people be happy and seeing them thrive. I think it's inspiring to me to also like what I'm doing is making a difference, and what I'm doing is actually something that's good for the world. I would say my passion kind of lies in the intersections between like medicine and humanitarianism, so definitely working with something like Doctors Without Borders or the Gates Foundation in the future, or like a nonprofit. After I graduate college, I definitely want to spend a gap year or two either doing Teach for America or Peace Corps, kind of also just putting myself in a new unfamiliar situation, locationally, geographically, and also while being really involved in the community and being able to form relationships. And if I can just like put all those things together, like learning and growing and exploring all in one thing, I think that is the biggest dream. I guess to get to that place, I will need to become a doctor. So at some point, going to medical school and doing all that education to be able to accomplish those hopes and dreams. I think overall the goal will just be continually finding new ways to empower people, to champion their success, to make people happy and healthy, and to find joy in that for myself.